Hello and welcome. I'm David Nir, Political Director of Daily Kos. The Downballot is a weekly podcast dedicated to the many elections that take place below the presidency, from Senate to City Council. You can subscribe to the Downballot wherever you listen to podcasts to make sure you never miss an episode. Joining me once again on the Downballot is guest host Joe Sudbay, who was with us last week as well.
David, it's always a treat to be with you on the Downballot, but these two episodes, wow, the timing, amazing. I'm so glad I could be here to unpack it with you.
There is so much to unpack, and we are going to do our level best to wrap our arms around the unbelievable events of the last couple of weeks, especially what happened on Sunday. Yes, we have to talk about it, but have no fear. We are going to drill right back down into our bread and butter races with our guest this week, Nathan Gonzales, who is the editor and publisher of Inside Elections, one of the most important publications that analyzes elections. They do race ratings that are definitely must reads. It is a fantastic conversation. It's a great episode. We have so much to get to. I know I say that every week, but this week it's even more true than ever. So let's get rolling. Well, Joe, we tried and we tried and we tried to avoid talking about the presidential race on the Downballot, but the universe has conspired against us. I just do not see any way to avoid it.
Well, at least this time, the universe has conspired in a way that's inspired us, David. And that is new and exciting. I'll take it.
I certainly will too. As a progressive, I am super relieved that this is all over. And I think Joe Biden will go down as a great president. His selflessness alone assures him a place in the history books, but his record, I think, will stand the test of time.
Absolutely. You know, I jumped on SiriusXM Progress on Sunday afternoon. We did live coverage starting like at 2:15 until 6. And the one thing that just really I kept repeating, because it's almost like astounding to think about it. But we know this about Joe Biden. He puts the country first. He puts America first. And that is so not true of his opponent, who puts himself first. And it was such a selfless act after a very successful first term. Joe Biden was president when we needed him to be president. And man, what a legacy. What a legacy.
There is no doubt about that. And his legacy, it's amazing how long it stretches back. I want to give a shout out to a tremendous piece that Daily Kos Elections editor Jeff Singer wrote earlier this week, chronicling Joe Biden's early electoral career. And I'm talking early. In 1970 and then in 1972, he won back-to-back races against supposedly unbeatable Republicans in Delaware. And Delaware was not the blue state back then that it is today. We'll include a link to the show notes. It's a really fantastic trip down memory lane. I am certain that almost everyone would learn a lot from it because I certainly did. And it really just shows Joe Biden has been in this for an exceptionally long time, and he has always cared. Of course, he's a politician. Of course, he has an ego just like anyone else, but he put that all aside after a really, really remarkable career.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think when Biden has mentioned several times that Delaware was a Republican state, and I think a lot of people roll their eyes and think, oh, there's Joe Biden telling stories. When I first came to D.C. in 1993, there were 3 members of that congressional delegation from Delaware. The other senator was a Republican and the member of Congress was a Republican. He was absolutely right. And now it's a blue state, which is another great part of his legacy.
Yeah, here's an amazing stat, Joe. Between 1954 and 2000, Joe Biden was the only Democrat who ever won a Senate election in Delaware. And when he ran in 1972 against a very popular incumbent, no one else wanted to take on, and he won in an absolute nail biter. He never had another difficult election after that, but he was a key figure in turning this state blue. And yeah, Delaware, sure, it's a small state, but every state matters.
Every state matters. Yeah, it is. It is a remarkable story. And I mean, and just the culmination, like I have to admit, David, we spoke last week and, there was a lot of angst among people we know and love and care about. When I woke up Monday morning, it was the first time in a long time I'd woke up without that feeling of dread. I actually was excited. I'm really enthusiastic. But that's true for everybody I know. I can't tell you how many people texted me or called me or sent me a message somehow to say, I just donated. People who had never donated before. It was just really exciting.
Yeah, the excitement has, I don't know what to say except for wow. I am unbelievably impressed and frankly shocked at how organized and seamless this transition has been. Where's the Democratic Party that we all know so well, the Democratic Party of Will Rogers? How are we in such array?
Well, what's wild is just last week, there were the articles from the Politicos and those kind of publications saying Dems in disarray. And remember, we talked about an anonymous senior House Democrat. And, I think there's nothing more odious than anonymous senior Democrats who rat out things to the DC Hill rags. But it said, we've all resigned ourselves to a second Trump presidency. That was last week. And this week, I think we're resigning ourselves or gearing up for a Kamala Harris presidency.
Yeah, I want to put my analyst hat back on. Sure. And you just referred to that conversation we had last week. The thing that we emphasized was the need for humility as analysts, because things can change fast in politics. Things did change fast, maybe faster than they ever have before. And you have to be able to recognize that change is always possible in both directions. Sometimes things get worse in a hurry, which is definitely what happened after the debate. And sometimes they get better in a hurry. And in 2022, we experienced both at the exact same time. America grew immeasurably poorer as a country when the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. But at the same time, that decision radically reshaped the midterm elections and led to some extremely unusual outcomes in November. We are in a situation, I think, that could be very much like 2022, and yet still totally different, maybe even wilder than the midterms. And we just have to stay humble, because that unnamed Democrat, they were wrong on the merits then, and now they're just wrong on the facts. So yeah, stay humble.
Stay humble, stay focused, organize, donate, volunteer, get involved. Use the energy that we were talking about last week, the concerned energy, use the positive energy, because you know what? There are so many, look, we're on the down ballot. We're talking about the presidential race, which rarely happens here, but it's the down ballot races that are going to be doing the work to get out the vote just as much as the top of the ticket. And they need our help even more. And their level of enthusiasm, I think you're seeing it just from candidates around the country, just how they are geared up and ready to go. And we've got a lot of work to do. It's going to be ugly. These people on the other side are going to make it ugly, but we know the task ahead, David. We must be humble. We must be organized. We must fight, because when we fight, we win.
Well, I think to finally really recenter the down ballot at last, I say that with another huge sense of relief. I think it's very likely that the newfound enthusiasm at the top of the ticket will have a trickle-down effect and boost races further down the ballot. I mean, we saw those absolutely bonkers donation numbers through Act Blue starting on Sunday, the moment everything broke loose. And those donations were not just to the Kamala Harris campaign. There were people donating to campaigns at all levels of the ballot, and also, as we saw from the statistics, tons of new first-time donors. Getting someone to donate to a political campaign, that's really, really hard, especially to do it for the first time. It is a major ask to have someone part with money for nothing tangible in return. And so turning on these new small dollar grassroots donors, especially in such large numbers, that's absolutely amazing. And I think that's going to have ripple effects.
Absolutely. And just let's remind everyone too, when we were talking last week, we were looking at polls in key battleground states for Senate races. Democratic Senate candidates were really polling well, ahead of their opponents by and large. And I feel like with this added boost and with this added money, because let's not pretend money matters, not just for TV, but for organizing and hiring people and opening offices, which the Biden-Harris campaign had already been doing, working closely with state parties. And let's give a shout out to the state parties too, David, because they're on the very front lines, as we know, and there are some terrific organizations in key states around the country.
Oh, yeah. Last week, Joe, one of the Senate races we talked about, of course, was in Ohio, where Sherrod Brown, of course, is running well ahead of the top of the ticket. I don't imagine Kamala Harris will catch up to him, but that's okay. She doesn't have to. But obviously, Ohio is going to be important this year, not just because of Sherrod Brown being on the ticket, not just because of Ohio's other senator, J.D. Vance, being on the ticket. And by the way, for as much as Sherrod Brown overperforms his party, Vance underperformed terribly in 2022. In fact, of all the Republicans who ran statewide that year, and there were quite a few, Vance was by far the worst. He ran 20 points behind Mike DeWine at the top of the ticket running for governor in that race. But there is another huge race that's going to be on the ballot in Ohio. We just got confirmation that the measure to reform redistricting in Ohio to finally create truly independent redistricting, this amendment will be on the ballot in November, and Ohio voters will have the chance to completely upend Ohio politics and usher in a new era of much fairer maps.
Well, first of all, let's give a shout out to Ohio voters who in 2023 rejected the Republicans' attempt to rig the constitutional amendment system and then overwhelmingly passed an abortion rights amendment and marijuana legalization. The other thing about this particular measure that's going to be on the ballot, this is the third time Ohio voters are trying to do this. In 2015, there was a measure for a bipartisan redistricting commission. Republicans destroyed it, basically. 2018, there was another measure to try and fix redistricting. Passed with 75% of the vote. 75% of the vote. The people of the state of Ohio want fair districts. And one of the things we've seen from places around the country, when there are fair districts, Democrats do well. Pennsylvania is a good example. Certainly Wisconsin, we're going to see it this year, and in Michigan. And, those three states are kind of important this year for a variety of reasons. But it's one of the things that I think the gerrymandering and that the Republicans do shows really importantly how they don't want to discuss issues. They want to use their power for the sake of power. And in Wisconsin this year, for example, there are members of the legislature who are facing hard elections for the first time. And these are many Republicans who supported the 1849 abortion law. So this is why what's happening in Ohio is going to be transformative. And I have every confidence the people of Ohio will, for the third time by a wide margin, try and end gerrymandering in their state.
Yeah, and the unfortunate thing about the prior measures is that they were very cynical attempts by Republicans to derail true redistricting reform. Because Republicans, to their dastardly credit, realized they sensed that there was this brewing movement against rigged maps. And so they co-opted it and put a measure on the ballot themselves that was actually really a sham redistricting reform. And we saw that play out following the most recent census because the Ohio Supreme Court kept striking down these gerrymandered maps, but there was no actual enforcement mechanism for the court to order a new map. And so Republicans just ran out the clock and they got to use completely rigged maps that had been ruled illegal by the state Supreme Court. And what was really sad about that, Joe, when those measures passed, is that there were a lot of folks on the left and government groups who praised them, who said, oh, we're finally in an era of, independent redistricting reform in Ohio. It's going to change everything. And folks who were a little bit more jaded, I gotta say, like us at Daily Kos Elections, we read the actual text of this measure and we said, whoa, there's a giant loophole in this that they can blow their way through. And that's exactly what they did. The difference is this amendment that is on the ballot in November in Ohio. It is a citizen-initiated amendment, so they had to get tons and tons of signatures to get it on the ballot. This wasn't just placed there by the legislature, and it is bona fide independent redistricting. And not only that, it requires the maps to be fair. The maps more or less have to reflect Ohio's statewide partisanship, which is say around 54-46, 55-45 Republican. The districts have to reflect that as well. There's obviously some play in the joints, but the commission can't pull together a map that winds up still being Republican supermajority.
It's so important that it's citizen-led initiative process, which still exists in the state of Ohio, fortunately. And, it does go to show, look, that the margins in 2015 and 2018, as scammy as they were, the Republicans' efforts were, does show the citizens, the actual voters, they like this. And of course, that's what freaks Republicans out, because voters really want to have a choice. They want to hear about the issues. And 2 years ago, I was talking to Michelle Au, state representative from Georgia, and she gave this just amazing explanation of how gerrymandering leads to abortion bans, because there wouldn't be abortion bans in some of these states like Georgia absent the gerrymandering that's gone underway. And this is why this measure is so important. And I'm really looking forward to keeping an eye on it and watching it hopefully be successful, and for Ohio to have fair elections. What a concept, David. In the year 2024, we're still fighting for fair elections, but that's what we're up against.
I will say, in other states, redistricting reform measures have done very well in recent years, and much, much redder states than Ohio. It passed in Utah and other places like that. So I have a lot of optimism. Obviously, Republicans are going to sling the usual lies about this. They're going to, try to spin it as redistricting being taken out of the hands of citizens, which obviously couldn't be any further from the truth. But I think Ohioans will probably see through this. And yeah, you're exactly right, Joe. This is the kind of issue that has a lot of crossover appeal. Like, Republican politicians hate the idea of fair districts, but like normal Americans, even a lot of pretty conservative folks, of course they like the idea of fair districts because they believe in fairness. Fairness is such an essential concept. I mean, think about the child who whines, "That's not fair." Well, they say that because fairness is such an ingrained human drive, and we want things to be fair. The kid who has that complaint wants things to be fair. Now, they may be wrong because they're just a child, but this is something we all understand. And I think fairness in general, that plays really well with the public.
I also think, the tagline, "Vote to End Gerrymandering November 5th," because as much as people want fairness, they really know that there's something wrong with gerrymandering. There's just something intuitively wrong with it. So hit that message hard this fall in Ohio.
Yeah, I'm sure that if you did a poll on the favorability of the word gerrymandering, it would be at -80.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, man, it's exciting. And again, David, this is why I love the down ballot, because we can talk about these down ballot measures, which have national impact, which have impacts obviously in the state, but certainly national impact. So I'm really excited I love talking about this stuff.
Well, speaking of down ballot races, primary season is about to get back underway. In Arizona on Tuesday, there will be primaries across the state. Arizona is usually an August primary, but the primaries were moved up a week earlier this year. So don't get caught sleeping. There are a ton of big races. We will have a detailed preview that we'll link to in our Morning Digest newsletter. Of course, if you're not already a subscriber there, just go to dailykos.com/Morning Digest. But one race in particular that I do want to mention is this open seat race in Arizona's 8th district, a very conservative House seat that features two of the most disgusting Republicans from 2022, two of the most disgusting Republicans, period, slugging it out. the failed Senate candidate Blake Masters, who was the creation of Peter Thiel and did abominably against Mark Kelly, and then also Abe Hamadeh, who lost a very, very close race for state attorney general in 2022. And they are just saying the most disgusting things about one another. I mean, Masters is all but saying that Hamadeh shouldn't be allowed to hold office because of his Muslim background. And Hamadeh has thrown shit at Masters for supposedly living in some vegan compound when he was in college. I mean, it's absolutely nuts. I wish this primary could go on forever. I love this for them.
Well, I have to say, every now and then I'll see an article pop up or something pop up on social media, and I'll think, and it's all about this race, and I'm like, okay, someone is just doing a spoof on this race now because it's become so absurd and almost comical. Now, I think one of the things Masters is going after Hamadeh on is because he doesn't have kids, and how can you serve if you don't have kids?
Right.
Okay. Well, I don't think Blake Masters ever birthed a child, but whatever. It's just this weird thing. It's like this creepy, weird thing. And the thing about it is, this is like these hardcore right-wing Republicans live in this little bubble that, they all talk among themselves. We saw it at the convention, Republican convention. We see it in kind of the way J.D. Vance talks and Ron DeSantis talks. But like when normal people are looking at this, they're not knowing what the hell these people are talking about or why any of it matters. But it is the modern day GOP, and it's particularly the modern Arizona GOP, because that party has gone completely off the rails.
And Joe, we haven't talked about GOP in disarray in a little while, but it's time to get back to that subject. The reason why the seat is open is because Republican Congresswoman Debbie Lesko decided to retire, and she only had quite a brief career in Congress. And she first won a special election in 2018. But here's the wonderful irony. When she announced her retirement, she's a member of the Freedom Caucus. She's an absolute far-right nutter. She said in her statement announcing her retirement that Washington, D.C. is broken. It's hard to get anything done. Lady, are you kidding me? I mean, this is like the meme of the guy in the hot dog suit. We're looking for the guy who did this. I mean, you broke this. And the amazing thing here is that whether it's Hamadeh or whether it's Masters or maybe some other candidate, though the two of them are leading, this district is going to send another absolute nutcase to DC who is going to make life absolutely terrible for fellow Republicans. Now, we smirk about this and we joke about this. Of course, it's disastrous for our democracy, but it also just creates added incentive for why Democrats simply have to take back the House because they are the only party capable of governing.
Absolutely the only party capable, the only party that actually puts its constituents first. That's a theme, David, that I hear all the time from state legislative candidates who I'm speaking with. And it's like they're in their state legislatures trying to deliver for the people. And when we see a Democratic trifecta, like we've seen in Michigan and Minnesota, they actually deliver for their people. When you see a Republican trifecta, they give tax breaks to billionaires, they obsess about crazy cultural issues, and then they want to ruin their public schools. The contrast couldn't be more stark, and it playing out on Capitol Hill too. And there's one thing I want to add here. We know how important it is for Democrats to take the House, and this is a pet peeve of mine, and I know it is of yours. If you're a Democratic member in a safe district,
yes,
don't be sitting on your big war chest. Looking at you, Lloyd Doggett, down there in Austin with $5 million. Donate to the D-Trip or donate to somebody and get that money into other races. Help us take the House.
Couldn't agree more. That is a perfect spot to end our weekly hits. Coming up on our deep dive, we are talking to one of the sharpest election analysts out there, Nathan Gonzales, who is editor and publisher of Inside Elections. Nathan is someone whose work I have admired and followed for years. I am super excited to have him on the show. It's going to be a fantastic interview, so please stick with us after the break. Joining us today on the Down Ballot is one of my favorite elections analysts and has been for an incredibly long time. Nathan Gonzales, who is the editor and publisher of Inside Elections, a must-read publication if you are at all in this world. Nathan, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Absolutely. No, it's actually my pleasure because I remember, I think we connected years ago when it was David of Swing State Project.
Yep.
And, before, DK elections was even a thing. So I don't know. This is great. I feel like it's not coming full circle. This isn't the end, but it's just a continuation of a long relationship.
Exactly. I mean, this is like just two OGs getting together. And I mean, Joe Sudbay beats us both, but it's awesome to have a little reunion like this. So speaking of, you have been at this for a while, Nathan, but I would like to ask, how did you get started in the field of election analysis?
Yeah, I kind of stumbled into it a little bit. I was on the more traditional political reporting track. I was working at CNN.com, working for the politics section of their website. At the time, it was called allpolitics.com.
I remember that. I remember.
To date myself, right before I had come on, the big thing was that allpolitics.com had done the first online chat with a sitting president. So that was the end of the Clinton, to date myself, the Bill Clinton administration. And so, but an online chat with the president, was the big thing. And through a whole series of events that we don't have to get into, my second job at CNN wasn't amazing, but my first boss used to work for a guy named Stu Rothenberg, who had something called the Rothenberg Political Report. And her name was Karen. She knew that I was looking for something new, and she knew that he was looking for someone new, and said, the two of you should talk. And so I interviewed with Stu, and I guess convinced him to let me on on the ride of the Rothenberg Political Report. And we worked together for many years. Took over the company in probably 7-8 years ago and renamed it Inside Elections because, why not throw away a 25-year brand? But it's been great. And so now we have Inside Elections. We have a great team, including Jacob Rubashkin, who's been on before. He's great. So I didn't even know that this existed growing up, that this was a viable occupation. I think it's still viable, but I feel fortunate because it can be an emotional roller coaster, but it's also pretty fun.
Yeah, I totally had no idea that I was going to get into this line of work either. When did you start at what was then called Rothenberg Political Report?
Yeah, so 2001. It was the 2002 cycle, so late spring, early summer-ish of 2001. 2002 was my first cycle really kind of diving into this stuff.
And so what sort of folks typically subscribe to Inside Elections?
Yeah, we have some political junkies and professors and some college and stuff, but our bread and butter is really political action committees of associations and corporations. I think they use the newsletter for a few different reasons. One of them is for research, because candidates will come to them and say, I'm running in Oregon's 5th district. I'm going to win, give me $5,000. And they'll say, okay, nice to meet you. And then they'll want to do their homework. So they'll look to us, is this a real race? Who else is running? Does this matter for the majorities? So they'll look to us, they'll look to our friends and competitors at the Cook Political Report, and before they want to make an investment. And they also use us as a perk to kind of give their people, either their members or their employees, a behind the scenes look at elections in a way that you're not really going to get on cable news. You're going to get a lot more kind of granular, but context to these races or races you may not even hear about at all on TV because they're House and Senate, and a lot of cable don't even pay attention to the House, maybe a little bit to the Senate. So that's the bread and butter right now.
Wow. When I think back, 2001, 2002, I remember those elections vividly. But one of the things I'm interested in, Nathan, you've got kind of a bit of a longer view than many. What has changed most over the years from in the world of the kind of analysis you and your colleagues do?
Yeah, the flow of information is just so much quicker and so much greater than it was. I'll give you a specific example. I remember covering, I believe it was a 2004 race in Kentucky. There was a Republican congresswoman in the Louisville district named Ann Northup. And she won the race. She was it was a competitive seat, and she was a Democratic target, and she won. After the campaign was over, sent us the ads, the TV ads on a VHS tape after the race was over, right? That's how we learned about the ads that were on TV, because There was no YouTube. You weren't, I mean, there wasn't, it just, that's how it was. And looking back, it's like, wow, it would have been nice to see these before. But now, not only, you can see ads, I get email updates from Ad Impact within, minutes of an ad going on the air, or people put up campaign videos that we have to distinguish between whether they're real ads or videos or not. And so that's just one way. There's just so much more information available, and it comes quicker. At the same time, sometimes doing this as long as I've done it, there's a humility that comes with it, because you've tried to project some elections and gotten them wrong, and you start to realize how much you don't know. Even if you do know, you've learned more about the race, but you realize there's a lot that you don't know, and it's hard to account for everything. So in this yet another set of tumultuous elections, I tread humbly, carefully, and do our best. But gosh, I'll give you one example of a humbling experience. A few cycles ago, again, to date myself, I remember when I made an assumption that if the FBI finds cash frozen in your freezer, that you're going to lose re-election. And I wrote a very nice, probably multi-thousand-word story about how Congressman Bill Jefferson of Louisiana was going to lose. And he didn't. Now, the immediate election after that happened, he won. He lost the subsequent one after that. But another humbling moment in this kind of election prognostication business.
Well, let me just dig into that a little bit, because obviously as analysts, a lot of what you base your thinking on is kind of historical data and trends, rightly so. But as we saw in 2022, a lot of the familiar patterns didn't really repeat. So how does your analysis of races work or shift in an election year like this, when we're experiencing some genuinely unprecedented major events?
I would still, understanding that there can be faults with historical trends, there can be faults with current polling, I would rather still rely heavily on data and make a humble projection rather than flying on some sort of other parameters, period. When we get to the end of a cycle, which we're getting to the end now, we are heavily reliant on data. That's public data, private data, partisan data, nonpartisan data. I want to try to see it all. And sometimes, and if all the polling, or we'll say most of the polling is pointing in one direction, that's where our analysis is going to go. Now, there's a chance that the other thing is going to happen, right? Or the other outcome. And in some of these key races, that has happened. And that's, I guess, worrisome for people like me or us, where we're diligently trying to get this right. We have no vested interest in one party or boosting one party or the other. We're trying to get this right. But again, the alternative, I don't even know what the alternative is or let's say, I don't even know how to compensate for some of the anomalies that have happened in the past. So let's say, okay, the polling in the previous cycle overstated Democratic gains. So I don't know how to compensate. So, all right, we can't just take, all right, we're going to add 2 points to Democrats or to Republicans off the top. It feels very arbitrary and subjective. So I'm doing a lot of sighing, and if people were to watch a video of me, it's difficult to navigate, but I also feel like data is the way to go.
You weren't here for Joe and I recording the top of the program, where we sort of discussed the state of things in the last few weeks more broadly, but you used the exact same word that we used, which was humility. I feel that there are a lot of hot takers out there who do want to come up with those new parameters that you're talking about, or come up with shortcuts and say like, yeah, well, the polls were wrong last time, so they'll be wrong again this time in the exact same way. And I really, I find very little value in that stuff. I find, and this is one of the reasons why I've respected your work so much for so long, Nathan, is because you guys represent the antithesis of that you guys are sticking to the information that you know, which is what we try to do at Daily Kos Elections as well, and not get over our skis, and not just throw everything out with the bathwater, but also to recognize that things can go totally haywire at any time for no reason.
Yeah. And I'm open to, if people can find better ways to do it, we should be open to that, right? Just being stuck in the same model is not that's never a good, well, this is how we've done in the past, so this is how we're always going to do it. That's never a good mentality. But I also realize that when someone does come up with a model or a way, and maybe they just nail it, right? They just crush a cycle. I feel like if you do this long enough, you're going to come up to a cycle where it's going to be, you're not going to be as accurate, and you'll kind of be brought down. So, all right, ride the high when you've got it. But there are going to be some, not just election cycles, but some cycles of where your projections are going to be more spot on than others.
So speaking of projections, that's a perfect opportunity to talk about race ratings, which I'd really love to dive into with you. I think it's one of the things that you are probably best known for. Folks listening to this show are extremely sophisticated consumers of election news, and definitely everyone has encountered race ratings. But how do you actually go about putting them together? I would love to get a look behind the scenes, if you could pull back the curtain a bit. And what do the different ratings actually mean?
Yeah. And before I'm happy to get into that, I will add that our ratings, I understand why they get a ton of attention, but it's also, I think, only part of the useful things that we do, right? When we do our deep dives into races, we're doing kind of full bios of candidates and introducing our readers and our subscribers to potential future lawmakers. Like, who are these people? Yes, let's try to find out who's going to win and who's going to be in Congress, but who are they? What are their backgrounds? And so I like to think that our coverage is more comprehensive than just the ratings. But let's dive into the ratings. Some of the frustration might be that we are not using a specific formula. There is an art and a science to it. It's not a specific model. Our ratings they are likelihood of flipping party control, working from toss-up, outward, tilt, lean, likely, and solid. I think Stu pioneered the tilt category, which was an effort years ago to not just throw everything into toss-up. Some folks have adopted that, present company included. But
we did for a while, though. We actually set aside race ratings. We haven't done them in a while. Okay. But which is why I'm delighted to talk about it with you.
So the ratings are in likelihood of flipping party control. And at the beginning of a cycle, what you do is you look at how did the district just vote, right? I mean, past results are or at least a pretty good indicator of how it's going to go in the future. And I think that's a good starting block. Then as you go through the initial part of the cycle, you are evaluating incumbent strength, candidate strength, including fundraising. What is the national political environment looking like, and how could that impact these races? And then as you get closer to election day, as I mentioned before, it's a lot about data. What polling can we get our eyes and ears on? A lot of it is not for publication or attribution, but we use it to inform our ratings, and we try to, and we adjust as necessary. One thing that might be frustrating for some folks that digest or use our ratings are that I would rather wait before moving a race rather than flip a race all over the place. Meaning, let's say we have a race in toss-up and then it looks like it's lean Republican, and then a month later, oh no, now it looks like it's lean Democratic. And I don't want to do that. I want to try to, let's identify not only just where a race is, but where it is likely to be on election day, and identify a trend and move it in that way. And sometimes that means just waiting before we can identify that trend. But that's where I'm in my, I guess, happy place, rather than being so volatile with our ratings.
Nathan, you mentioned something interesting, which was your access to non-public information that informs your ratings. And I mentioned a second ago that we had stopped doing ratings at Daily Kos Elections. And part of the reason why is that we felt that we didn't necessarily have access to the same level of information that some folks like you do. So I'd be really curious to know, what does that look like? Who communicates this with you and why?
Well, I can't get too specific because that would hurt. I'll just say when you look at any individual race, there are lots of interested parties and groups that have a vested interest in that race. Everyone from the candidate, the committees, the outside groups. There are a lot of people taking the temperature on races. And some of them can't coordinate with others, and so they need data of their own because they can't share it. And so I spend a lot of time begging for data. I think both parties have a vested interest in trying to understand where a race stands, right? And they're only able to look at one, usually one or two data sets. And so I think they realize that we often have access to other numbers that they're never going to see. And so that I want to believe that everyone has a vested interest in good ratings that on our side, because then they realize where do these races match up in the broader picture as they're looking to make their media buys or their strategic decisions.
You must have occasions, though, where one party is showing you they've got the Democrat up 10 and the Republicans have the Republican up 10. Does that drive you nuts? What do you do in those kind of situations?
Yeah, those happen. That happens, and that just causes me to try to look for more and hope that the outlier will emerge. But more commonly, the parties have a more similar view of the races than what you might think. And I'll point out that I think maybe I'm in the minority in that I still value partisan polling because they need good data to make those multi-million-dollar strategic decisions. These aren't just one-off press release polls. And so I like that they have skin in the game. My former colleague, Leah Askarinam, who's now at the Associated Press, I believe wrote a story a few months ago. It might have been late last year, sort of about that, the case that I'm trying to make. But that also adds to the data set. If you're only relying, particularly on House stuff, if you're only relying on nonpartisan public House polling, it's slim. I mean, it's slim pickings out there. So having more data rather than less data is a good thing.
Well, actually, slim pickings and House races, you actually have at Inside Elections started a new project to poll what you've called, and I'm going to use the exact quote, the most consequential congressional races in the country. One just came out about a week ago. But tell us about the findings, what you found in this poll, in this district, and why you chose this district.
Yeah, or why we even started to do this, because everyone knows that getting into the polling business is everyone has an opinion when you put out numbers. But part of the motivation behind it is that lack of House polling out there. I mean, the presidential race gets a ton. The top Senate races are going to get polled a ton. Not a lot of people focusing on a major chamber of Congress and part of the legislative branch of government. So we've jumped in. We're partnering with Noble Predictive Insights out of Arizona, a nonpartisan firm. And we released our first poll during the Democratic Convention in Michigan's 7th district. So this is the Lansing-based Alyssa Slotkin open seat. She's running for the United States Senate. And it showed, this was post-debate, pre-assassination attempt, pre-convention, and pre-Biden removing himself from the race. So this was July 8 through 11 on this particular sample. And Republicans had great numbers. I mean, in this particular poll, Trump was up 8 on Biden. Tom Barrett, the Republican in the House race, was up 7 points against Curtis Hertel, the Democrat. Slotkin was basically even with Republican Mike Rogers in the Senate race, which that's about how that district has performed in past Senate races, except for this is her district, so she probably should be doing a little bit better. But I also listed off all the events that have happened since then. So that is, we're still waiting as if the dust ever settles on multiple historic events where this plays out. But I'm excited. I want to be clear. We're not conducting the poll. We have commissioned the polls. We're letting the pollsters do the work. We have input on the questions to get the things that we think are most interesting and we want. But it's an opportunity, I think, both to reveal things to the broader public. But when we get down the line, if we get to some of those districts, David, that you were talking about, where it looks like the two parties are polling different planets, we have the opportunity to go, all right, let's see what we find. And that could help bring some clarity to some otherwise, confusing or rating situations.
So, yeah, this is a district that Biden in 2020 won by a whisker. So Trump being up 8 would represent a very considerable change. But like you said, the world has also changed since that poll was fielded. Do you think you might go back into Michigan 7 to see what has changed somewhere down the line?
That's a good question. We did also test Harris because post-debate, there was more talk about whether Biden was going to stick this out. She was doing a couple points better, which lines up with some of the initial stuff that we're already seeing, that there isn't that the initial switch from Biden to Harris might not be dramatic, but I do think it gives Democrats a better, broader opportunity to change the narrative and the trajectory of the race. Will we go back? I'm not dodging your question. I don't know. I mean, there are so many House districts that I would love to take the temperature of, and we don't have an endless budget for this. Polling does cost money. So maybe we go back, but I have a feeling that there's so many other good districts that we may not go back to this particular one.
Well, can we dig into that a little bit? Which of those other races you might plan to poll? I know your colleague, Jacob Rubashkin, who you mentioned a few minutes ago, and he's been on the down ballot as well. He asked for suggestions on Twitter, which we love that. Any want to break any news here and tell us?
Well, thankfully, I think he had, last time I looked, about 90 responses. So I think it guarantees we're probably going to pull one that was mentioned, but also make a lot of people upset by not polling other ones. I won't tell your listeners that we're in the field in Ohio's 9th district right now. This is Marcy Kaptur's seat, re-election bid in a redrawn district with a non-J.R. Majewski candidate. Republicans are very excited, but it also has that overlay with the Senate race that will be interesting as well, because Senator Sherrod Brown needs to do very well everywhere, but he needs to do well in this district. So we are breaking some news here. We expect those results probably be able to release those early next week. And beyond that, candidly, we don't have a grand plan, because I kind of want to stay agile in what we're doing. And thankfully on this one, the big news, the Biden-Harris stuff happened just before we went into the field, and we were able to adjust the questions.
There's one thing that was quite interesting that I only realized the other day in Ohio's 9th district, which was this seat that Republicans changed dramatically to make it much, much redder to target Kaptur, and Trump would have won it by about 3 or 4 points, is that J.D. Vance actually very narrowly lost the district in his 2022 Senate race. And, there's obviously a lot of things that particular to Vance and also his opponent, unique to that race. But I would imagine that might make Marcy Kaptur feel a little bit better about her chances, even though she's facing a much more traditional opponent than her rival last time.
Yeah, I mean, I think Kaptur, she has her own brand. She's facing a tougher opponent. She needs Sherrod Brown to do well. She needs now Vice President Harris to, lose by less would be helpful. I don't think Harris has to win the district, but that top of the ticket, the trend has been clear in recent cycles of a lack of ticket splitting in President and Senate and President and House races. Before Biden dropped out, Democrats were really hanging on that people were splitting their ticket for a long time into this cycle, but how big of a hole was Biden digging? So now if Harris can get back to even something close to Biden's 2020 margins, then that will really help, down ballot Democrats. And, the Senate's still tough, but the House, maybe give Democrats a fighting chance.
Well, we have been talking with Nathan Gonzales, the editor and publisher of Inside Elections. Nathan, before we let you go, where can our listeners find Inside Elections? Where can they follow IE on social media? And also, where can they find you?
Yeah. So InsideElections.com is the hub. We do have the Inside Elections podcast, where we also, similar to this one, we are laser focused on House and Senate. We'll do presidential stuff. We won't do the foreign stuff, which my brain is not that big. I admit, I tap out on the foreign stuff, but it's a heavy dose of House and Senate races. On Twitter, I still call it Twitter, at Nathan L. Gonzales. You also need to be following my colleague, Jacob Rubashkin, who's just at Jacob Rubashkin. He is awesome. He knows many of these races better than I do. Yeah, those are the basics. So yeah, feel free to follow us. And definitely, if you haven't heard the episode with Jacob or aren't following Jacob, he's a rock star.
Strong second on that. Well, Nathan, thank you so much for coming on the Down Ballot this week.
No problem. We'll see you soon.
That's all from us this week. Thanks to Nathan Gonzales for joining us. The Downballot comes out every Thursday everywhere you listen to podcasts. You can reach out to us by emailing thedownballot@dailycoast.com. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the Downballot and leave us a 5-star rating and review. Thanks to our editor, Drew Roderick, and we'll be back next week with a new episode.